Hey everyone, this is FIDE Master Kostya Kavutskiy here for Chess.com, and today I'll be doing all the highlights from Week 10 of the US Chess League. The first game I wanted to show you guys actually took third place in the Game of the Week contest, and this is between Nikki Korba of the Los Angeles Vibe and Amanda Mateer of the Arizona Scorpions. And what we've got here is a pretty complicated Benoni. The pawn structure is really unbalanced, as is typical for the Benoni. White has got this massive pawn center here, and in compensation, Black has a really strong dark squared bishop here on g7, as well as good control over the dark squares in the center, such as e5 and d4. And here, White played a really nice move. He played the move f5. And usually this move is kind of anti-positional because it gives up the a5 square, but in this case, by playing f5, White has pretty much stranded Black's bishop here on g4. Now they can threaten something like h3 and g4, trapping the bishop. Black played queen e7 and h3. And here Black decided to just sacrifice the bishop with g takes f5. Just sacrificing the bishop outright and going for White's king. White took on g4, knight takes g4. And here, Black really doesn't have enough compensation for the piece, but the position is pretty tricky. White's king is quite vulnerable, and their pieces aren't that well placed to deal with Black's impending initiative. And here White played the move rook e1, and this is definitely a mistake. A better move would have been something like knight c4. Just putting the knight on a good square and opening up this bishop to control some of these dark squares like f4 and g5. And here White is definitely enjoying the advantages of having an extra piece here. Once they get their pieces into play, Black really won't have much of an initiative, and slowly but surely White will win the game. Instead, after rook e1, White allowed this move f4, which is quite strong. Pushing the pawn forward, attacking White's last kingside defender, the g3 pawn. And the point being, if g takes f4, then queen h4 is pretty devastating here for Black. So after f4, White couldn't take this pawn, instead had to play knight f3, trying to get some of their pieces out. And then after f takes g3 and king takes g3, it's clear that Black is suddenly getting a lot of compensation for the piece, since White's king is pretty exposed, has no pawn cover, and Black's pieces are pretty much ready to get into the action. So knight e5 was played, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, and king f2. So White still has an extra piece, Black has two pawns for it, but the problem for White here is that their king just doesn't have a safe square on the board. Another thing in Black's favor is this bishop on e5 is just such a strong piece. It influences both the queen side and the king side, can never really be disturbed, and really dominates the entire board. So king h8 was played, strong move, just bringing the rook to g8 and keeping the king safe. King e2. Here White decided to start running their king to the queen side, where hopefully it would be defended by all these pieces here. Rook g8, king d1, rook b8, queen h4, bishop e3, knight e7, queen d2, and b5, and Black is doing the right thing here. They're just trying to open up the position as much as possible, get their rooks into play, and try to create some tactics against White's king. A takes b6, rook b6. White took this a pawn, rook b3, queen c2, brought the other rook to b8, rook g1, and knight g6. And again, this is tough for White because Black really has no weaknesses here, and White's pieces, especially this bishop and knight, are just not doing a whole lot. They're just sort of sitting and trying to defend everything, but not very active. And here White played the move king c1, and this is probably not a very good move. Better would have been something like bishop c1, just defending this b2 pawn and making Black's rooks look kind of silly on the b file here. But of course the game still remains pretty complicated. So king c1 was played, queen h3, and now what's going on here is that Black is just attacking White from pretty much all angles, and it's just hard to keep a position like this together, especially in time trouble. So rook e1, queen g3, and rook e2. And this was actually the losing move of the game, which allowed black a really nice tactic here. And the game pretty much was over after the move knight f4. Double attacking the rook and the bishop. And after bishop takes f4, bishop takes f4 check, king b1. Black found a pretty simple combination. Rook takes b2, queen takes b2, and queen takes d3. Winning the bishop and winning white's queen as well. So king a1, rook takes b2, white threw in a check, king g7, king takes b2, and bishop e5. And here black has a queen and 2 extra pawns versus white's 2 rooks, but the reason why black is really just completely winning here is this bishop again is too strong, putting pressure against white's king, and eventually Matir ended up winning this position pretty much just by pushing the pawns forward on the king side and making use of the active queen and bishop. Next game I wanted to take a look at is between IM Tom Bartel of the Philadelphia Inventors against GM Tamaz Gelashvili of the New York Knights. So this game was pretty interesting because it seemed like it had such a positional nature, but the end was decided by really interesting mating attack that was pretty much unexpected. But here we had this position, and GM Gelashvili was playing black and had a pretty comfortable position. His rooks are very active along the A file, he has a nice knight here, and it's not clear what white really had going for them. They had this open H file, but of course not so easy to make use of it, since black is ready to start playing stuff like rook a2 and putting a lot of pressure on white with their control over the A file. But here Gelashvili came up with a really interesting idea. He played the move h5. And the point of this move was quite profound actually. After g takes h6, he played king h7, white played rook h4, and now f5. And this was the whole point of playing the move h5, was to play this move f5 and start getting pressure in the center. So he essentially sacrificed the pawn, gave white the seemingly strong h6 pawn, but as a result got to push his f pawn forward and threaten stuff like e5, e4, putting a lot of pressure on white. You know, this idea, doubled with the fact that black's rooks on the A file are so strong, was pretty interesting and not something we really see in all of our games. So after white's next move was bishop d5, queen f6, king g2 was played, and now e4. And this was black's idea, to put their queen along this diagonal, break with e4, and try to get a lot of pressure going with their rooks here. D takes e4, rook a2, white retreated with queen d1, Gelashvili even threw in g5, white retreated, rook h1, now f takes e4, so he finally recaptures this pawn, rook f1, g4, rook c1 was played. At this point, white was pretty much just trying to defend everything and keep black from breaking through. Attacking the e2 pawn, rook e1 was played, and king takes h6. And this is actually a really serious mistake. All of a sudden, white got a lot of counterplay here. Bartel played rook h1 check, king g6, and rook h4, and suddenly white is taking this g4 pawn with check, and black's king is really feeling the dangers of not having any pawns around him for shelter. Queen takes e2 was played, rook takes g4 check, king f5, rook f4 check, king e5, and it looks like black's king is actually kind of safe on e5. There's no way white can really get to it, except for the move queen h1, which Bartel found. And now the queen is heading to the king side and getting ready to attack black's king. And this rook is perfectly placed on f4, defending the f2 pawn. And all of a sudden, black is in huge trouble. He played king d4, just trying to get his king safe, and hopefully somehow he thought he could survive with his king on d4 and all his heavy pieces around. Queen h7 was played. Now white just wants to play queen g7 check and mate the black king, rook e8, and this was probably the last mistake. He really should have tried actually the paradoxical king d3, just heading further into white's camp so that queen g7 could be met with rook a3, defending the c3 square. And for the moment, I don't think white really has a way to checkmate black, but still this position is crazy. So from here, anything could really happen, especially if the players were short on time. Instead, Gelashvili played the move rook e8, and Bartel played queen g7 check, rook e5, and queen takes c7. And this is actually a really strong move because now white just wants to take this pawn on d6 and set up a discovered attack against black's king and mate the king in the center of the board. And again, black's queen and rook look so nice on the second rank, but really can't do anything against white's king. This rook on f4 just defends everything. Gelashvili tried rook takes d5, cd, and king takes d5, but after rook f5 check, he simply resigned. The point is that black is simply getting mated in the next few moves. King e6, then queen f7 check is mate, and if king d4, then simply queen takes d6, and the game is simply over. Now, if you want to see the rest of this week's highlights, definitely head over to Chess.com for the full-length video of mine where I cover the rest of the best games of the past week. But otherwise, I hope to see you here next time.